to the second in the series called Gems from the Collaboration Archive. Gems from the Collaboration Archive, which we just call Gems for short, is a multimedia project where we take an old article from Collaboration and redesign it with our new revisioned journal. And we select an article from the past that's in line with the current theme. And the theme for this spring issue of 2022 is Crisis and Emergence. So we selected Devan Nair's article, Towards the Great Turning Point. And part of the multimedia aspect of the project is to also have a roundtable discussion where we look at the article and find ways to use the article to help us individually and collectively with our practice of integral yoga. So with that, and the other thing is that we invite other groups or other individuals to record their own thoughts on the article and share it with us. There'll be a link down below to the article, and hopefully you subscribe to Collaboration and also have the journal in your hands to be able to read along and follow the discussion with us. Lynda?
Okay, there. So the current GEMS article is written by Devan Nair, who was really a very important fellow. He was born on a rubber plantation in Malaya in 1923, moved to Singapore when he was 10. He participated in World War II and afterwards became a revolutionary against British imperial rule. And they threw him in jail for 5 years because of that. And he eventually became the president of Singapore. And he was also a teacher, a lawmaker, a trade union leader, and he organized Singapore workers and turned them into, helped Singapore basically develop one of the strongest financial positions in Asia. He later moved to the US and Canada and became a visiting fellow at Cornell University. And actually, just recently in 2014 in Singapore, they opened an institute for employment to honor his contributions to the labor movement. So he was very famous, very charming, very charismatic. And this article is called Towards the Great Turning Point. And it's about how we come into the integral yoga, how we meet Aurobindo. So I encourage you to read the article if you haven't. It's available up on the Collaboration website. And it's an edge of the seat story. It's really amazing. And it talks about how he witnessed Japanese atrocities in World War II, horrible things. He spent 5 years in prison for his revolutionary activities. And during that time, he was introduced to Sri Aurobindo by reading The Life Divine, and amazing things happened. Magical doors and windows flew open, and he soared up out of the cell on wings of fire. And you know, the article is very hilarious, very humorous. He talks about his own intellectual egotism, and then he talks about how it was just smashed in one instant when he fell on his knees before the mother in Pondicherry. So that's the article, that's the author, and I think we can kind of take it away now into a discussion.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lynda. So right in the first paragraph of the article, Devan brings up, I'll just read the article, I'll read the sentence here. He talks about contradictions that make us swing wildly between extremes, right? He's talking about towards the great turning point. So contradictions that make us swing wildly between extremes, between exclusive sky or exclusive earth, until at last we find ourselves suddenly placed before something else, capital something else, which at once includes both sky and earth, height and abyss. So we were, as far as practice goes, we're wondering what does he mean by this, and what do our experiences tell us around this? What What experiences have we had around this?
I guess I could jump in really quickly. Before I came to integral yoga, I had a bunch of inner realizations that kind of put me in touch with the higher spheres. And so I did a bunch of reading, and I read a lot of the Eastern traditions, the Gita and Buddhism and the and they told me that what I needed to do was abolish myself and become enlightened and then leave the earth plane. So I was like really trying hard to do that. I was doing a lot of meditating, like 4 or 5 hours meditating every day. And I thought, well, that's a peculiar path to solve all your problems by erasing yourself. But I guess that's what you're supposed to do. And then I came to Sri Aurobindo and learned that no, you don't erase yourself. You purify and transform yourself. And you work on your nature, on the different parts of your nature, to give them expression and to give them delight, and to make the practice one of engaging with the earth, not denying the earth. That's good enough.
Yes, and I also love the sentence right after where you finished reading, Mateo. What is above also shines perfectly right down below, and it's just very simple, but very powerful, because I think a lot of the times is that if we're going to take these kind of archetypal sky gods, sky traditions or earth traditions, a lot of the times it can become all consuming, and you start to feel centered in that, and you then therefore the other really becomes something that is different, that it doesn't shine as brightly, maybe because that's not your personal lived experience of what works for you. And I think that this is really just kind of this topic, I think, is really important, because it's trying to help bring out the idea that each one of us in our practice coming into integral yoga might be attracted to certain aspects of it or ways of practicing. Is it a sky? Is it more into the illumined mind? Is it the yoga of knowledge? Earth? Is it more the karma? Is it working with your hands? But really realizing that each one of them has its own kind of value, that it's maybe not your experience, but at the same time we need to hold the reality of all these as equally valid, equally true, and not fall into history, the problems of history, which is really, as epochs change, it's almost like they will make the enemy of the opposite.
Yeah, and on that note too, I think it's a lot about finding that perspective. You have you have such a different perspective of practice when you're floating above the earth in the sky, or when you're sitting down on the earth. And I think it's important to have those perspectives and everything in between, or that kind of that smile between the two worlds. And it's like there's the different energies as you move across from one swing to another, and like how do you use that energy in order to build your practice and build your perspective and build connection too, because it is about polars, but it's also about the spaces that come between. So I find it very interesting to try and bring this as your beginning to your article, and try and figure out, especially in this day and age when we have such polar energies going on, and how do we reconcile that? How do we reconcile that within ourselves and with our external world, and within our families, within our communities, within countries? So yeah, I think it's very pertinent to what's going on.
An integration point. Finding an integration point.
Yes, the integration point, exactly. That's my integration point to jump to my to my comment. No, because in fact, an integration point that is able to comprehend in its wholeness these two extremes, these polarities. That's what I think we still have to learn somehow. And integral yoga is integral precisely for that, no? Because it wants to integrate something at the spiritual level, at the material level, but also in between there is also the psychic level, the psychic part of us, no? And I think most of us are more or tendentially more psychic or tendentially more mental spiritual, I mean. But to bring these two things together, this is really the real challenge that we have today. And it's not about integrating good and bad things. And in fact, I notice here, he doesn't say include heaven and hell. He says sky and earth. It does not, these polarities don't have there's not one that is very positive, the other very negative. They are both positive, we might say. But the difficult thing, the trouble in which we are living today, is to bring these things together. Or we are extremely this one or extremely that one. Nowadays we say, oh, you must be able to do a bit of everything. Multidisciplinarity. I don't think this is also not the right thing. We should be able to be plastic in this sense. Not necessarily that we must do one thing and the other thing and everything, but we should be able to practice everything, in a certain sense, when it is necessary. And and I like it very much where he says both sky and earth, Hades and abyss. But abyss may be also something. I like the ocean abyss. You know, this with these rovers and robots and looking for life under 5,000 meters below the ocean, the sea level. It's terribly fascinating. There's nothing negative. And yet, that's, I think, and suddenly placed before something else, which is neither the sky nor the earth, but it is a third position. That's something that we find frequently in integral yoga, I think. That we try to bring together two things. We think we should add them together. And now also Mother speaks about that in the agenda, that we have to find a third position, which is neither that nor that the other thing. So that's a great challenge, I think.
I just wanted to add to the comment about the abyss. And I'm glad that you brought that up, Marco, because I think that, the practice, sometimes we find ourselves in these spaces that feel like, that abyss, or that even the practice we chase for that abyss, so that we have that clarity of mind, we have that peace and calm, so that, that you can appreciate the extremes in a way. So I like that. Thanks, Marco.
Aurobindo describes the supramental as an abysmal silence. So it's also very abysmal.
I love that we're talking about what's going on in the world today, even though this article came from a while ago. It's like right now I feel like there's a polling of consciousness. It seems to me, and this is just a seeming, that there's drastically different levels in the evolution of human consciousness above humans right now, within humanity right now. So it seems like we're at this point in history where there is a great turning point and something coming, and it seems like these painful contradictions maybe not necessarily I don't maybe necessarily experience them as contradictions between earth and sky, but there's a polling. And I recently read Sri Aurobindo's last known letter, where he was talking about his sadhana, and he talked about, and I don't even know what this means, but he talked about supramentalizing the overmind. Right? I've got flashes of what that means, but then he also talked about trying to lighten the gravity of the inconscience, right? Trying to lighten the gravity of the ignorance on our mind. There's like something wanting to break free, that I think that Devan was getting at the first point in this article and throughout the article. And to kind of to transition, the next stage that he brought up is talking about the devils within.
Yeah, I could jump right in there and maybe read a sentence or two. Pretty interesting. He says he was arrested in 1956 by the British in Singapore for revolutionary anti-British activities. And he said, I'd become painfully aware that revolutionary ideals can also be betrayed by the revolutionaries themselves. For every man-made revolution is ultimately betrayed. But the most terrifying discovery was that the devil was not only without, he was also very comfortably housed within oneself. In fact, not just one devil, but several devils. For there are mental devils, vital devils, and physical devils, right down to the cells of one's body. I find this a really interesting point, because in my own life, you know, that idea about the revolutionaries who betrayed the revolution. I was always fighting, you know, trying in my yoga to do the transformation and being obstructed, you know, running into all these situations that would put an obstacle against my progress. So eventually I got rid of all the obstacles. I got rid of all the relationships that were destructive or not helpful. I got rid of the work situations that took me away from the focus on the divine. I moved from a city where I couldn't get sufficient support in integral yoga. And I basically created a perfect situation, a perfect community, a perfect house, a perfect work situation, and everything's perfect, correct? Wrong. My life is a wreck. Why? Because the devil is within. It's not everybody else that's the problem. It's in your own nature. And one of the biggest examples I can give about that is, you know, people in integral yoga, they say, you know, the vital is bad. You know, all spiritualities say the vital part of your nature, the life force, is really a rascal. And you got to tamp it down, because otherwise it will sabotage your yoga. And you got to calm things down, and, you know, it'll run away with desires, and it'll run away with passions, and it'll get angry. So vital, that's what Aurobindo calls the life energy, bad. What happens if you have a not very strong vital, if you have a weak vital? What happens, for instance, if you're placed in a situation of isolation, for instance, COVID, and all the people that you usually see, you're not seeing them, all the vital energy that has been supporting you from other people is gone? What happens if you're stuck there in your own nature, which is very kind of inert and tamasic? What happens when the vital is withdrawn? The life energy goes, the force for effectuation goes, and you find yourself in under the influence of the physical consciousness, where everything is inert. Action is hard, it's difficult, it feels impossible, and you can't do anything. And what is that? That's your own, when you come to realize you're down in the physical part of your nature, that's what happens. So good luck, happy transformation. You have to deal with the problems in your own nature, whatever they are. Everybody's got a different slant on that.
I think I wanted to touch upon a couple things there, Lynda, and just develop a couple of the ideas that you brought up. But one that I've discovered, actually, I didn't realize it, but when I think back about my life and how I came into integral yoga, I've realized that the revolution is a theme, and it's very interesting. What I was very drawn to by Devan's article is that he was in politics. He was in the world, in the middle of these forces, polarizing forces, and he was working in the world with these. And I don't think it's a coincidence that he came and he found Sri Aurobindo and the mother, right? Sri Aurobindo, same thing. He was a freedom fighter, very literally. And when it comes down to, thinking about yoga as there's many yogas, the tradition has so many yogas, but one way to understand differences in yogas, in the metaphysics that separates them, in the praxis, the practice of it, is what is the goal? What's your goal? And how are you going to accomplish that goal? And then what kind of a metaphysics, what kind of a psychology do you need to accomplish that goal? And I think that Devan, very similar to Sri Aurobindo, being in jail. I have not been in jail. I was not a freedom fighter, but I remember that I was maturing in the world. I was young, in my younger 20s, and I was becoming politically engaged, and I wasn't strong enough. I felt I couldn't sustain it. I really felt like I was burning out, and I didn't know how to really work on the devils within, but also work on these what seem to be all of these different forces in the world. How do you reconcile them, and how do you make yourself strong enough to be in the world of work? And so that's what I'm realizing, is that, again, it's not a coincidence I was drawn to Sri Aurobindo's yoga. I think that yoga is revolutionary at its core, and I think that Sri Aurobindo, his life embodies that, and it's very, I think it's very important to sort of recognize that as well.
Yeah, I like this idea, I mean, of the revolution, because I think there's so many more implications, like that word itself has, I see circles, I see spirals, I see center points, and I see so many places that you can be within a revolution, and I think that we, within the article, we feel that he's working, he's working around, and he's trying to find that space to come not only out of the intellect and into a space of almost devotion, which I think is where he ultimately got to with the mother, which I thought was extremely evocative, especially as I myself don't think of myself as an intellectual person. I'm really not. And so, like, the reconciliation of that is just another cyclical style of energy, and I really appreciate that about the article and coming around in that space. But you can feel, I think we kind of moved away from the idea of the devil within. But I think that it's almost kind of like a devil's advocate too, which I think that you kind of need to work through these ideas, because they help you to solidify your position, and they help you to understand the world around you and where you want to be, and hold on to your goals. Because I don't think that we can just be spinning around in circles. I think we need to find the center and be able to see what's going on and really hone ourselves in to that center. And I'm reminded of the mother's figure, where she talks about the path of yoga, and it kind of, there's this path and it zigzags all the way up to the top, and then her line is like straight up. And I think about that kind of straight up as just being that pinpointed idea of your goal, of the goal of integral yoga, and keeping that focus and working with all these devils inside to try and figure out what it is that you really feel about what's going on around you and what's happening in your yoga, and how you can really come into relation with that. And like I remember having many discussions with especially my brother-in-law, and and even with Jonathan sometimes, and it feels like we're going around in circles, and I just have to say, okay, like I have to find that space in me to just stop at some point and just take in everything that's gone on, and then come back to the center and say, okay, what is that goal? What is that, purpose within the yoga to really latch on to and regain that focus, or find yourself back in that apex of the abyss almost.
So viva la revolucion and viva la evolucion. Maybe both paths are enacted. The straight path, where Sri Aurobindo with Integral Yoga said we can collapse the first chapters of Synthesis of Yoga, were quoting Vivekananda, saying that we can collapse a lifetime worth of yoga into a month or less. I always wonder, how is that possible? And here Devan brings us to a description of that experience where his mental ego brings him in front of the mother, and he talks about meeting without leaving the conversation of the devils within, just bringing forward what he's talking about, these deep experiences where he's reading Life Divine in jail and his mind is completely blown. He's meeting the mother thinking he's like going to meet an equal, good work, mother, congratulations. And it's 10 a.m. and he falls in her lap and then doesn't even know what happens and comes to in his room at 7 p.m. So there's an evolutionary moment that's not spinning around, where something cut through and sent him right into maybe the abyss. But there's the question that pulls at me is how to integrate these experiences. There's so much going on today that's making me swing in a lot of different directions. There's barraging coming from all different ways. Sometimes I don't even know what to think. Like, I know what Putin is in Ukraine, what he's doing in Ukraine is wrong. And I can also see that cornering him with NATO has been a really bad move too. But it's still, that doesn't make it right. There's still something, there's all these things that get thrown into the field that makes me feel like I'm in a cooker, and there's like these potentials for breakthroughs, but I can't quite articulate it. I just know that it feels like sometimes it feels personally like I or we are on the edge of an abyss, the edge of a potential sort of quantum shift in our evolutionary potential. And I can't help but want it, but I also don't know how. There's something elusive here that I'd like to get at, but I just simply don't know how.
Well, I don't have to add much beyond what you already said, other than saying that when I saw him speaking about the devil within, to my mind came something completely different than what usually people think about it. The first image was Elon Musk, who has this idea to send people on Mars, and to colonize Mars, as if this would transform the world or us or our future, and would guarantee who knows what. And I have always this image that it can't work as a solution to the human problem. It's nice. I'm a space age, space exploration freak. I have nothing against that. But if we will bring the devil that we have within also on Mars, we will start all over again. Also wars, because they will colonize Mars, and there will be different nations there as well. And you in the United States, you have seen that, no? You have colonized the United States, and then there was a civil war. So if you bring the devil that is within in a certain place, it will follow you. It's like a shadow. So I think this is something that has not trickled down in our collective conscious understanding. I mean, what this means, because otherwise we won't have these kind of ideas as being the ultimate solution to the problems of humanity. They are not. Yeah. So this was just an anecdote, an image that came to my mind when I saw writing him about the devil within.
Actually, I had another thought, Mateo, when you were talking about his epiphany when he saw the mother, and about how he kind of lost consciousness from, 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. I visited Pondicherry in 1974, and 1 year after the mother left her body, on November 17th, 1974, they had Darshan in a room, and we went into the mother's room 1 year after she left the body. And I went into the room, and what do you think happened? I don't know what happened. I don't remember. All I remember is that the light got like really bright and my brain just fogged. And to this day, I can't remember. So I think what it was an experience so powerful that the rest of me was not yet equipped. It hadn't evolved the faculties to understand or perceive it. And moving a little forward, some years ago, for a couple of years, I had a series of descents, spiritual descents, of this crushing force, this golden force full of blasting power and unbearable bliss and illuminated knowledge. And it was, fantastic. And I was saying, what is this? It was like enormous, And I thought, the transformation is here. Oh, it's going to be really soon now. And then it stopped. It stopped. Why did it stop? Because we need to do purification. We need to purify those devils within. And like Marco says, we go to Mars and the same thing. So if you haven't cleaned out all your instruments, your life, your body, your mind, and made them receptive so that they don't block this descending force, you're not going to be able to hold it. And that's the problem with revolutionary politics, is that they have the ideas up in the mind, but they don't, they get ambushed by the other parts of the nature, by the vital passions and angers and prejudices and preferences. And in fact, there's a whole new kind of politics that I'm reading about in a book right now called prefigurative politics. And it's a kind of politics that says exactly this: meet the old boss, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. When the revolutions succeed, the old thought forms, the old patterns are still there. Prefigurative politics are, you have to embody the change as you're doing it without trying to put it out as a mental idea. In other words, you have to act, you have to be the change. So being the change means purifying your instruments and working on that so that you can slowly, bit by bit, embody this new consciousness. And the take home is that it takes a long time. It's not instantaneous. It will take time.
Yeah, I think that's a really important aspect to my practice. I was going to say, like, the normalization of some of these types of experiences that we would have had, or that I have had spiritual experiences. And to me, it seems like this can become very much a part of like the practical psychology. I'm sure Aurobindo talks about yoga as practical psychology. So like it's I think that's very helpful for me, and that was helpful in sort of saying that it's not about trying to build towards some penultimate experience. Even it's about every single moment being a penultimate experience, as normal as it may be, or as extra normal or extraordinary, as mystical as it may be. Falling onto the lap of the mother is not going to, it's not a normal, I mean, that's not doesn't happen every day, you know. So but looking at every moment with fully charged of that potential, you know. And in terms of, you know, just bringing it back into how I approach this in my life in terms of musical practice. You know, again, there's I've had experiences playing music with others and by myself, and you know, they've been very important to me. You know, it's sort of like it fills you with energies or with potentials that you don't normally have access to. But I think for me, it's just a matter of every day picking up the instrument and playing. And that's all that really matters. And the more that I've done that in my life over the course of decades, the more that I realize that potential, that like kind of almost that mystical type of potential is there to be perceived if we develop the organs of perception for it. And it just maybe happens in a different way than we think. It's not it doesn't overwhelm us in a certain way, but the potential is, I think, is very much there and present, you know.
I think, you know, what you're saying is bringing yourself into the space of surrender, right? You're surrendering to the music, you're surrendering to that process, and really trusting it, you know, to help bring you to a space where you feel like you can move beyond where you are, or that you can come into realization or come in touch with something bigger or larger than yourself. And I think that, you know, I think it's important for everybody to have these kinds of, you know, things that are available to them in their lives that can bring them to a space of surrender. And I think it's hard for people these days to really find that space of surrender and allow themselves to be taken in by something and to really trust in it. I think that there's a lot of trust issues, and people find, you know, they feel alienated, they feel segregated, they feel polarized, you know, which is, you know, something that we need to try and find, you know, like the polar opposites of, like right back to the beginning of the articles, like how do we find this space? And I think that, you know, we try to do it here, you know, in this group within collaborations and working through gems and stuff like that. And just being able to find that space of surrender. And, you know, in my journey with Sri Aurobindo and the mother, it was, you know, it's kind of interesting to just, you know, I really didn't know anything, you know, and I really didn't read very much, you know, but I did have the good fortune of being in Pondicherry and being, you know, at the good guest house, at being at the ashram, at being in the playground, and being in the ashram buildings, and even going to Aurobindo, and just being saturated in that and allowing myself to surrender and trusting in the process without really, you know, like intellectually knowing what was going on. And there was something that was really inviting about that, and something that I really appreciated about the kind of universal nature that Sri Aurobindo had in his writings, you know, which, you know, of course I didn't really understand that, but I did. We had read, you know, through our Guru Shantanuji, you know, reading some of his work, and I think just the writings in English as well really helped me to kind of find this energetic connection with these ideas, just to come into that space and just to be in that surrender and not worry so much about what it meant, I felt, I did feel safe there. And I think that that is really important. How do you feel safe? How do you know that you're safe? And if you're not safe, how can you get it? How can you move yourself out of that space? And
Yeah. And from the article, just one last quote here. This is from the article. Aurobindo said, "I wrote The Life Divine to help people silence their minds." That it's as potent as it gets.
Yeah, so we're talking about Devan Nair's article, Towards the Great Turning Point. There's these contradictions between earth and sky, these realizations coming out of places where he doesn't feel safe, which is really interesting because as humans, we thrive. I think we thrive when we feel safe, yet there's these like really jarring experiences that can spur incredible growth. And so we're talking, and the life divine experience. His mind got blown while he was isolated in jail. He fell at the feet of the mother when he was expecting to be meeting an equal, and then he ends the article. We have about 5 minutes left. He ends the article with a Percy Bysshe Shelley poem, Ozymandias, where the poem says, "I met a traveler from an antique land who said, 'Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor, well, those passions red which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away.'" How does this tie in? Why did he end with that?
It reminds me a bit Satprem, that he said, the description of what happened in the concentration camps, where he said, "I have been ripped off of everything." And he didn't use this word, but I would paraphrase that, and there was a colossal wreck that remained. And the emperor was naked, and there was nothing. And on that nothing, you can begin to build up and construct something. Sometimes it's like that. We must be ripped off of everything and be naked in that sense and find ourselves in front of a colossal wreck to begin anew. That's my interpretation.
Yeah, I think it ties it back to the beginning of the article nicely, this idea of revolution, and back to these polarizing ideas, and back to, that everything that he went through. I think it ties everything together very nicely.
Yeah, and I think I would add what came to me when I was reading this is that sometimes certain kinds of languages just are not going to get the job done when you're trying to express experience. Experience can't be reduced into like language in that sense, and analytical language. I'm thinking, which is why we have poetic language, and I think that it was I think as an author, sometimes you get to a place where you have to break out and say my experience here can only be contained with a poetics of, you know, and that I think it says a lot about that gap between experience and how we come to know experience through the mind. And I think that's, you know, this, you know, one of the themes that we've been talking about, that mind-blowing experience, the silencing of the mind. I think that's a really, really important aspect of this article and of integral yoga. That was why I, you know, that's what has, I think, been my biggest challenge over the course of the last many years. And at the end of the day, there's times when there's an experience that I feel like I really want to share. I want to create community with it, and music has always been that for me. But I never really understood poetry growing up. I never got it until I had Savitri in my hands, and I realized, oh wow, language can do what music does. And I had no experience of that. That was a big moment in my life. I was like, first 25 years of my life, I had no idea the power of poetics, you know.
What it brought up for me, I think he's talking about a couple of things here. He's talking about hubris, you know, intellectual arrogance. He's also talking about time the destroyer, okay? And so you think about whatever, let's say a generation, a person or a generation is involved in. It feels so immediate, so important, so real, and then give it 10, 20, 100 years and it's all faded. So my mom was a member of the greatest generation. She had to do an MRI once, and they played music while she was in the tube. And they said, you have to be very still. And they played 1 O'Clock Jump by Count Basie. And she was like, oh, you know, and she came out and she said, what did you play that for? I just wanted to rock and roll. You know, they played 1 O'Clock Jump. And the attendant said, what's 1 O'Clock Jump? And they'd never heard of it. And Mom went, how could you not know what 1 O'Clock Jump is? Well, you know. And then just the other day, I was in the dentist office and they raised the chair and it was like so high tech. And I told the assistant, I said, wow, this is just like a Star Wars X-Wing fighter. I feel like I'm in one of those little fighters. And she goes, oh, I never saw Star Wars. It's like, she's too young to have seen Star Wars. You know, and then I think back, we're talking about revolutions. So I came of age in the 60s revolution. And, you know, the ideals were so huge and they were so wonderful, and the epitome of the leaders were the rock and rollers. Okay, you had all these rock and roll stars, so charismatic, so full, so handsome, so beautiful, so full of power. Okay, and what do you see today? Every day, 3 of them a week, they're dying. Okay, and the whole baby boomer generation is going over the cliff. The whole, you know, like that scene in Inception, the movie, where all the buildings are just crumbling into the sea, and you see the whole generation crumbling, just like Ozymandias, King of Kings. And what that brings up is, Mother says, to keep up with the divine, you have to move very fast, okay? And the divine moves very fast, and if you aren't anchored in your soul and anchored in the timeless, eternal, you're gonna, you know, be disintegrated in that movement, because the divine needs to move forward. So that the take home for us is we need to follow that fast evolutionary movement, or else.
There's no possible way to end this conversation, but you can get a hold of us at info@collaboration.org, and of course you can subscribe to the journal at collaboration.org/subscribe or /journal. You'll find us there, and we'll link to it down below. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you for listening, and don't hesitate to get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Bye-bye.